Welcome to the Eschatology Podcast. This is Clifton, and I'm here with Earl Zausmer. Hello, Earl.
How is everybody today? Hello.
It's a pleasure to have you on here. We made a connection a while ago, and getting this started, Earl is probably no stranger to most people listening to this. But if you remember a red BMW, I think my biggest memory of that was probably around 97 IASCA finals, and had the fender tilted out, showing the infinite baffle mid-bass or sub-bass driver and the kick panel there, which we'll talk about later. But anyway, Earl, thank you for joining us. I appreciate you making contact here. You know, kind of start from the beginning here like we normally do, but what's your earliest memory in audio? Kind of how did you start getting attracted to it?
I think it all started when my parents bought a new house, a house from someone, and we moved in, and he had a stereo, and my father bought the stereo with the house. It had horns on it. Can you imagine this? We started with horns and vacuum tubes with beautiful, I think it was Altec Lansing speakers, a Reco cut turntable, which was a studio turntable. I had no idea what we had. I was never into music. I had no albums. And we started that, and I started listening, and then I got music, and boy, it kind of lit me up. Listening to good sound that I was never exposed to. That's what started that type of thing. And I got more and more interested in it and followed it. I ended up getting myself a Marantz stereo, and then all of a sudden, one day I'm reading Stereo Review or Audio Magazine at that time, and there was a review of a Infinity servostatic speakers. I don't know if you remember them, but they were electrostatics with the subwoofer in the center, and I couldn't figure out how come that speaker was only 3 inches deep. How did it work? I'd never seen one like this before.
Yeah.
And I called the company, and who picks up the phone? Arnie Nudell, the president of Infinity. And he explained it to me and says, there's a dealer that has this speaker in your area. So I call him up, and I said, what are your hours? He says, it's appointment only. And I had never heard of an audio dealer of appointment only, because I used to take my bike and go to Sam Goody's, Lafayette, and Heathkit. And you didn't have to make an appointment to go there. And I made an appointment, and I rode my bike. I was only 13 years old.
Wow. Where was this?
In Philadelphia.
Okay, Philadelphia. Okay.
And I walk in the room, and I guess he looked like, well, you sounded a lot older on the phone than you did in person. I said, can I bring my bike in? So I go in there, and all I see is brands that I had never heard of. This is like an introduction to the audiophile world.
Right.
And there was a tweeter, and there was a fire on the tweeter. It was called the ionophane tweeter. And you had to light the tweeter, and it had gas on it.
Wow.
And what happened was the cone was actually the air. So it had no cone material. It was very unusual.
Yeah.
And that's where I first saw Audio Research, and I never heard of them. AR was acoustics research,
right?
But Audio Research, I never heard of them. And it opened up a new world for me, and he turned it on, and I'm telling you, it was quite nice. And I didn't understand anything. But then he says, have you ever heard of this magazine, The Absolute Sound? Mm-hmm. And you've heard of that magazine, I'm sure.
Absolutely, yep.
And I said, no, but I subscribed to Stereo Review, and I just stepped up to Audio Magazine, Right. He says, well, here's a copy. He says, I have an extra copy. He gave it to me. I read it. I didn't recognize a single company, and I started getting involved and listening. And, it evolved from there. And I had a lot of equipment. I bought a lot of equipment. And, I ended up at the top end with the Mark Levinson HQD system in my house. That was a very, very special system. It had double quad speakers, electrostatics, Decca ribbon tweeters, which ribbons weren't even the style back there, and two 24-inch woofers. with the Mark Levinson ML2 amplifiers. Now remember, these were only 25 watts apiece, pure Class A, and they were 82 pounds per channel. Okay? All LEMO cables. I mean, this was a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'd started a business when I was very, very young.
Mm-hmm.
And it just progressed from there. And it was, I knew what good sound was. So my audio, before I came to audio, I was a home audiophile.
Right.
All my friends were home audiophile people. It was just, and then we had the Philadelphia Audiophile Society, and all my friends were there. So that was my life. Good music.
That's when you started kind of mingling beyond the stores and magazines and
oh yeah,
learning more from others as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when one of my friends come over, he's a professor at University of Pennsylvania. He's a big audiophile. He says, "You know what? I think audio cables sound different." And this was before, we all had molded rubber cables.
Right.
His name was Ken Subramanian. I said, "Ken, you're going off the edge." Well, I go in his house. He's got transformers on the refrigerator, transformers on the television. He's got isolation transformers and everybody. And I said, "I know this is the guy. These are the people." And needless to say, that was the first time I ever heard the difference between cables. I thought it was crazy, but it was right. And, those people really would invite you over their houses. So I got to hear many, many systems. That was the good thing. Everybody shared, which is what brought me into the car audio of sharing. That, so-and-so said, "I just got this." I would say, "Hey, can I come over? I'd love to hear it." So I got to hear a lot of good systems in home settings during that time.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed good music. And I guess the only down part about it was that after I got the HQD system, there was nothing better.
Mm-hmm.
And, you used to go over all your friends' houses, and now all of a sudden their systems didn't sound so great.
Yeah.
And to go to the stores, I'd go to Music and Sound and see all the new stuff. I'd go to SoundX, and I'd get on my bike. I would ride to these stores. It was really strange. And it's like, they don't have anything better than what I got now.
Mm.
It kind of stunted everything. But,
right.
It happens.
You hit a plateau because there was nowhere else to go.
No, and all your friends come over, and they're all sitting there. And after a while, they didn't want to come over. They said, because it sounds good. And now I go home, it sounds like I'm driving an old car,
Right.
But I enjoyed it. It had such dynamic range. So from that system, I learned what to listen for.
Yeah.
That was a very important fact, what I like, what I didn't like,
Well, and I'm sure being able to listen to other people's systems as well, you started that process of evaluation and critiquing the differences between their systems from each other and your own.
Oh, yes. And remember, I was running all open reel tape.
Oh, wow.
I was one of these serious guys.
Yeah.
I had the A77 Revox, the B77 Revox, and I had the Crown tape deck. Biggie.
Wow.
Real big, real heavy thing. And I had such good stuff. The Souther straight tracking arm. I had many arms, different Koetsu cartridges, different transformers. I went through so much equipment from here to there. And so after a while, it's pretty easy to evaluate something in a very short manner.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't have to listen for a half hour.
It's good or it's bad.
You can, you know it. And you know what to listen for after a while.
Absolutely. Of those early systems that you built, obviously you went up to the ultimate, but was there a first memorable system where you thought you were getting to the point where you wanted to go, or was that when you got to the end?
Well, that was the end speaker system.
Okay.
That really was. But before that, I had started importing Rogers LS35As. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
The little speakers, they were BBC monitors. And they were just the cat's meow for a small system.
Okay.
And could you imagine you're going from a 4-inch speaker and a tweeter to a 24-inch subwoofer? Talk about a mismatch.
Big gap.
Yeah. It was just, I would say you just build on the systems. And sometimes I'd buy an amplifier. It would only stay in the house for maybe 2 weeks. It's out of there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go on to a new one. That's what we were doing. We were always upgrading and going. And I had a lot of specialty hand-built stuff. Like I had the Paoli amplifiers. There was a man in Paoli, Pennsylvania. He hand-built these specialized amplifiers, and I ordered one of them from him.
Oh, wow.
I had the Futterman amplifiers, really esoteric stuff, and Harvey Rosenberg's OTL amplifiers, tube amplifiers with no output transformers. I got to tell you, a lot of fancy stuff, and everybody had everything that was the oddball. We had people at first, they had all their cables suspended by nylon strings from the ceilings so they wouldn't touch the floor. They wouldn't be near it. I mean, you're talking about people that if you mentioned the word UFO, they said, "Oh yeah, we know them."
very, very esoteric type people.
But really nice people. We all had the same goal, was to get good sound. So that was my basis, and I enjoyed my hobby. I enjoyed listening to music.
Did you get any more into the business side of it beyond the importing of speakers, or?
Well, at 15 and a half, I said to my dad, a dealer during those times was not allowed to discount any speakers.
Right.
And I wanted these special speakers. I said, they're like $1,800. But I called up a dealer in England, and he said he'll deliver them to Philadelphia for $723.
Oh, wow.
My father said, "Okay, if you think that's right." So I ordered that. And about a week and a half later, it was here. And it was like, oh my God, wait a minute, this is a business. Yeah. And needless to say, I never actually got to unpack it because I told one of my friends, and they said, "How much you want to sell it for?" So I sold it for $100 under the United States list price. And I never got to open them. They were gone. So then I ordered another set of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ordered some Rogers speakers.
Right.
I ordered some other stuff. And then I put an ad in the back of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Before they even got here, they were already sold.
Wow.
And I was all of a sudden, having a full business. And even quad speakers, the flat electrostatics.
Yeah.
I found the dealer. It was Reading Hi-Fi. And I said, "I'd like to buy a few set of quads from you." And he says, "We only get one pair like every 2 to 3 months." I said, "I'll take it." He said, "Okay." So I sent him the money, and the quads show up. And I said, "I'll buy some more." He says, "You want to buy my supply out for the year?" I said, "Probably." I said, "But let me buy another 2 pairs." They were already sold before I even sent the money over to them.
Wow.
And he says, "I like selling to you because people that buy quads, after they buy them, they're always hanging around the showroom saying, 'Oh, my quads are doing great,' and they hang, and you can't get rid of these people." And, he says, "and they all have technical problems, but there's nothing wrong except in their heads." He said, "If I send it to you, I never see or hear from it again."
Take care of it.
So he was always over. And then he offered me turntables. That's when I got my first Lynn Sondek. Not from America, but from there. And it was like, I never realized there was a difference between turntables. And it was really something.
Wow.
I was doing every shipment was like, during that time, was like $9,000
wow.
a shipment. And I was doing one every other week.
That's phenomenal.
For a kid 15 years old, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I never got the speakers. I never got to use the IMF speakers. I never got the quads. I never even got the Rogers. Everything was already sold. And then I brought some FM tuners in.
Okay.
And I sold it to a guy. He says, you have a quad, from Quad, the company.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a quad tuner? I said, yeah. He says, I'll buy it. He says, can you put an antenna up for me? I said, oh, yeah, no problem. No problem.
Never having done it before.
I learned all about that. Yeah, I did that. And I put up an antenna, an FM antenna, because in Philadelphia we had a great channel, and they every Wednesday they have live broadcasts from the Curtis Institute.
Oh, wow.
And they were as good as you can ever ask. And then I bought a tuner. I don't know if you ever remember, it's called the Marantz 10B tuner. It's a very special tuner. It's all vacuum tube and had an oscilloscope mounted in the tuner. So you tune the radio and you could see what the antenna's bouncing on. It was considered to be the gold standard.
Yeah.
And I remember I put up an antenna up on my parents' roof, and my neighbor comes over and says, hey, I want to get in New York television channels. Can you do that? Yeah, no problem. And I started, because of audio, I started installing long-distance antennas I had close to, I just got my license. I had 8 people working for me putting up antennas.
Wow.
We would just drive around neighborhoods with downed antennas, and I would put like a door sticker on, if you want your antenna fixed, we do this. And all of a sudden in Philadelphia, to receive all of the New York television stations, it started a whole business.
Wow.
And, and then one time somebody said, "Why are you doing my antenna? Can you do my alarm system?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." 4 years later, I sell my alarm company to Wells Fargo Security.
No kidding.
Then
Wow.
I bought all my accounts out. And then while we were doing it, I also did intercoms. So I did intercoms, alarms, antennas, and it was really a big business.
Yeah,
and I was just a kid.
I was going to say you're still in your teens at this point, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. So how did you transition from all that into car audio?
Well, I got married, and life was over at that point. It was like, I said, why married men die before their wives, don't you?
Why?
Because we want to.
It's a decision.
Yeah. So I got married, and I had different businesses, and I had started a business based out of my audio business. Remember I told you I also did intercom systems?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I said to my father, I said, I got to go to England and meet these people that I've been buying this stereo equipment from for quite a while. I said, I should meet them, see if there's something else. And when I went there, I saw this intercom on an embassy that had a video camera built right into it. I copied down the name, called them in Germany, and I ended up getting an entire line for the United States. And that company, a few years later, it was 10 years. And that was because of audio again. It was a success because of my audio hobby.
Yeah.
And 10 years later, sold the business. I had 72 reps working for me, had a warehouse and over 600 distributors. And a company from Europe came in and bought my whole operation.
Wow.
All because of audio.
Yeah.
And what happened was I had a white BMW at that time. It was a 525. I don't know what year it was, maybe a 90 or 89 or something like that. It was a nice car. It was very, very nice. After all American cars, to have a German car was very, very big for me.
Right.
And I remember I wouldn't touch the car. It was like golden at that time. Who would ever think of putting even a hole into a BMW?
Right.
And I still had my home stereo system, and I really loved it and everything. And what happens, I see an ad in the paper, and it says, car stereo contest in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And I said, I'm going to go. I got nothing to do. It's on Sunday. I'll go and see what it's like. I thought everybody was going to just take their Bose system and turn them up, and whoever turned it up the best. No, I mean, that's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
I had no idea about any of this industry.
Right.
And I get there, it's like there's a whole big convention center of companies displaying all different speakers, amplifiers, all this kind of stuff. It's like the parallel universe to home audio.
Yeah.
They had the amplifier companies, they had the head end, they had all the speaker companies and all this kind of stuff. And it allowed you to do a lot of your own thing. So I went to the show, and there was a lot of head banging, like those loud systems. And that didn't do anything for me. I was looking for, good sound. And I could see that this one guy, his name was Richard Clark. I'd never heard his name. I didn't even know who he was. And I saw that he was the big guy. There was no two ways about it. His car, that Grand National that he had, that was, I think that was like the top place. Nobody could get in it. Nobody could touch it. But everybody, I said, who is this guy? And they said, well, he's, like one of the major guys that really, he holds a lot of patents. He's very smart. He's an engineer and all this stuff. I said, great. So I later go up and introduced myself to him. And I said, it's my first time going to a car audio show. I'm a home audiophile guy. And he says, oh, you'd enjoy this car. I said, can I hear it? He says, if I let you in, I got to let everybody in. He says, why don't you come in after the show and you can sit in the car with me? I said, great. So I stayed there the whole time. Everybody had left. He was just ready. He was just ready to take the car down. I show up. He says, come on, hop in. I hop in, and the first thing I noticed was when I closed the door, it was heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It was very heavy, and I didn't know why. And being Jewish, I'm looking like, oh, shoot, the door's closed. I'm never getting the hell out of here. This is it's like the end for me. It's like there's got to be like gas nozzles in here somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And I sit in the car, and it's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
There's no noise in this car.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see any speakers.
Yeah.
I didn't see any speakers at all. And he said, what would you like? I said, do you have any Sheffield discs? And I said, sure. He said, Richard said, yeah, I have one of them.
Mm-hmm.
He puts it on, and boom, it was the moment.
Yeah.
Everybody has a Yahoo moment or a moment that it happens.
Yeah.
When he turned on that system, I turned my head to him. Within 3 seconds, I said, are there horns in this car? I knew it right away.
Yeah.
There's a sound of horns.
Sure.
And he says, yes. I said, where are they? I said, I can hear them, but I can't see them. He says, there. I said, and he points to them. I said, where? There's nothing there. I didn't know any of this stuff. And he plays it. And I knew for a fact at that moment that a car could support a really good sounding system, not a headbanging system,
mm-hmm.
but a really good quality system. And mine would not be horns. There are horn speakers I've heard at many of the shows and at some of the homes, and they have very good qualities. And for a car, they have good qualities too. But for me, I wanted a speaker. Richard Clark's car, as good as it was a technical breakthrough, in my opinion.
Right.
But, he had a lot of things in that car that I didn't know about. I had never heard about capacitors for power management and all that stuff. It was a technically perfect car, in my opinion. But to me, it wasn't a listenable car. It wasn't what I call the British sound, which is a softer sound, something you want to turn on, you want to listen to it all day and never turn it off.
Right.
That's my definition. British speakers have what they call the BBC bump, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation bump or dip. Round 2 or 3, they have a certain dip in there, and it gives the illusion of naturalness and warmth.
Mm-hmm.
That's why British speakers sound like that. It's not a mistake. It's on purpose. And
So you're talking. There's a dip between 2 and 3K.
Yeah, just look it up on Yahoo. Just say the right. BBC dip, or the BBC bump,
right? And
the Rogers LS3 BBC monitors had the same thing. You could listen to them all day. You never get tired of them.
Got it.
By the time Richard had played a bunch of songs, I couldn't listen to the car anymore because it was perfect, but not listenable to me.
Just too forward.
It really wasn't. And it wasn't forward.
Okay.
There's a difference between, I had the big Mark Levinson HUD system, and they were solid state amplifiers. And if you look in any of the big audio magazine, when they say the classic amplifiers of all time, the ML2 is always on that list. Mm. Within a short while, I would say 6 months, I sold them because I wanted to have tubes. Mm-hmm. I like the sound of a tube. Certain something about it. So, I said, I should start investigating things. And I went back to the main hall, and everybody was packing down. But I took a lot of the names and started looking them up and asking them for literature because there was no strong internet presence for any of these people. And a lot of the stuff was made for cars to hold up against the temperature and the humidity of the outside.
Sure. And
I said, you know what? I want to start with something that I know is a good sound. And when I talk about the British speakers, there's Kef's speakers, there was Spender's speakers, Harberth, and there was Quads, and there was B&W, Bauer Wilkins.
Right.
And I said, the B&W 801 is such an all-around system. It sounds good. How about if I maybe get the speakers and try playing around with this thing? So I managed to go to a dealer, and I bought parts originally. This was before I approached B&W. So I bought the woofers out from a 802, which were only 8-inch woofers, and I bought mid-ranges and the tweeters out of the 801. And then I said, who's going to install this stuff? I don't even know. And, I look in the car audio magazines, which I didn't even know existed either.
Right.
And I saw this guy, Rick Ferrero. And I call him up. I say, can you do the system? I said, I've got the crossovers from the 801s. I've got the speakers. He says, and he just says, I've never done something like that. And even the amplifiers, I had 6 of those Sound Stream or Sound something. The ones by Nelson Pass, 25-watt Class A, he said.
Yeah.
It goes into Class A at like 0.1 watt, I think. That's about all the Class A you're going to get. But it was done by Nelson Pass. So I'm saying, I didn't even know that this guy, the man that did Threshold, that did all these big companies, was into car audio.
Yeah,
so
that was SoundStream.
Yes, a SoundStream.
Yeah.
So I bought 6 of them, and I brought that. I brought the speakers and everything, and the head end. I had a Nakamichi Dragon, or like a really good Nakamichi head end, because I knew the name from the home stuff.
Sure.
And I drove the car up there and dropped all the stuff, and I said, I don't know anything about car audio. Can you just make me a system that sounds good? I'm giving you good parts to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what to tell him. I'd like this or that. It's like a babe in the woods, but he was a good guy. And the system ended up like normal, the 2 woofers in the back. The mid-ranges were in the grills on the dashboard facing up towards the windshield. And the tweeter out of the 801, he made some modification and fit it into a new kind of grill where the original tweeters were on the BMW doors. They were on the doors.
Okay. Yep.
And it took him like 4 or 5 weeks. I got the car back. I go up there and he turns it on. I said, wow, sounds pretty good, And I felt very good with him. I had never had a problem with him. And he did a job that when I got in the car, I said, where is everything? It was nice. He used the original grills, so the 4 inches were under the dashboard facing up, and he sealed them off. But, the openings were only like 2 by 3 inches. It wasn't much. Mm-hmm. And I go home, and I enjoyed the system for a while. I really did. And then I saw that there was a car stereo contest, and I asked a contest near us. And I said, I'm going to take my car there. And I pulled up, and it was in a big grassy field. And this was my first contest. And I gave them the money to enter, and they said, okay, you have 3 minutes or something to tell us about the car. And I'm sitting there and says, well, I went to this car show. I met this guy, Rick Ferrera. He's a really cool guy and all this stuff. And he says, 3 minutes up. He says, how come you didn't tell us anything about the car? I said, I did. He said, no, you're supposed to tell us about your system. I didn't even know you're supposed to tell him about what's in the car or why you did it or anything.
Right.
I didn't know anything. He says, do you have any pictures? I said, no, why would I have pictures of my system? I didn't know anything. I really didn't, a newcomer, let's put it that way.
Right.
At the show, I started listening to other people's systems. And I remember there was a guy in a Pontiac, and he was like the big guy or something like that. He wouldn't even let you in his car. I got secret stuff. I don't want anybody to know. And finally lets me in the car. I'm thinking, the secret is your system sounds horrible. It has nothing. It's horrible. It's terrible. You don't know what good sound is. And as I listened to more and more cars, each one sounded worse than the other. They didn't have any naturalness. I was used to a natural sound. Mm-hmm. They were used to a car sound. At that time, even the Becker radios for Mercedes were terrible sounding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I think I can do better. And that's when I started playing around with the car. And I started moving this around, moving that. And then one day I get this kooky idea after going to a Pink Floyd concert in Philadelphia. And I'm looking and saying, why aren't the woofers at the Pink Floyd concert in the back of the room, like in my car? And then I realized the woofers have to be in front, because when they were hitting bass notes on, like when they were doing Dark Side of the Moon songs, that bass hit you in the face. And you could feel it. Mm-hmm. You could feel it on your face. Yeah. And that's when I said, I'm going to move those 8 inches. And I'm like so nervous to touch Rich's work. It looked like a piece of artwork. When you took it down, even when I took it out of the car, it was like a piece of artwork. Mm-hmm. Stuff that I never would have seen he did it perfectly.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to. He could have made it sloppy, but he didn't do it. And I remember I went to my local installer. He was right around the block. I said, I want to take those woofers out of the rear panel and move them up where my kicks are. She takes it all apart. He says, you'll never fit them up here. I said, well, how can we fit them? I had never even had the grills off. He says, well, I have to cut into your fenders and this. I said, well, let's try it. And the guy, my dealer, tells me, he says, you're going to have to prepay me to do this because I don't want any responsibility. He says, I have never cut the fender open of any car.
Wow.
And I said, well, not true. I'm going to try it. And needless to say, we go to a garage, and he didn't do it at his regular place. He did it at another place where he had more tools.
Okay.
And it was the place where they service Aston Martins. So the place was filled with Aston Martins. It was really cool to see them. You could tell the Aston Martin dealer, if he sold eight Aston Martins, 8 of them were in the shop. Do you know why Aston Martin never made televisions? Do you know why?
No.
They couldn't figure out how to make a television leak on a regular basis. Don't break down that often. So needless to say, we go to the place. He doesn't even take the fender off. We just cut from the inside. And he says, you sure you're going to do this? He says, what's going to support the car? I said, let's try it anyway. It doesn't matter. Stupid, whatever. We put them in. He makes a piece of wood to cover it. We mount the woofer to the wood. And as soon as we turned it on, he looked at me and he said to me, he says, we got something really big here. The whole dynamics changed the system. And they were only 8-inch woofers. And it was really big. And he says, you know what? He says, I doubted you. He says, but I've never heard a car with a frontal sound like this. It was powerful. And remember, I got 3 dB more of volume because it was closer to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it was done, I had to turn all the volume for the 2 woofers down.
Wow.
Just to have them listenable. So there was a lot of pluses, but it was mounted to wood, and because that's all you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I drove around with these woods with no grills, just raw speaker mounted to the car for quite a while. And then I'm saying, wait a minute, there's other things to be done in this car, which brings me to the next aha moment. Okay. Aha moment. And it happened at Super Bowl. I know people would look like, what does stereo have to do with Super Bowl? We went over to our neighbor's house, and he had that big projector television, the one with the 3 guns. Remember?
Like the red, green, blue? Yeah, yep.
Yep. And I'm watching the game, and all of a sudden I'm looking like, wait a minute. What about if the red gun was in the kick panel facing somewhere? And what about if another one was in the door, the green was in the door, and the other one was facing up towards the windshield? Would I ever see a picture again? The answer was no.
Right.
Because you could never watch a 3 gun if they were coming from all different directions and different lengths away from your hearing.
Right.
And I said, those speakers have to be facing me directly, as if my eyes or my ears are the screen. That's how I thought about it. And not only that, this was before there was time delay.
Okay.
And this is when Richard had just introduced saying, time delay makes a difference. And I'm looking like it's only a little car. I mean, it's like not much. And then I thought about what he had said. And when we're watching the Super Bowl game, I said, what would happen if I took the red gun of this 3-gun television and delayed the gun 3 milliseconds? The picture would be ruined.
Mm-hmm.
You'd see shadows and all this stuff. And that's when I started to say, everything's got to be up front. It's got to be facing towards me. That's the most important fact. I didn't even know about early reflections or anything like this. And I remember I was playing with it, and I mean, you can't believe it, but I took those speakers out from under the dashboard. I had never taken a car apart in my life. And I took the speakers, and I start taking gray duct tape and taping the speakers to the dashboard up on top. I mean, it's dangerous to drive this car. And then I'm taking wash towels around the back so it kills the back waves. And it's just loaded with tape. I mean, really loaded with tape up on the dashboard. The tweeters are still on the doors, like the car comes. And I remember the first time I turned it on, I was running lamp cord wire from the old wires to the new speakers.
Mm-hmm.
I had no knowledge of any of this stuff. And as soon as I turned it on, it's like, what the hell is this? Like all of a sudden the voices are up on the dashboard. They're here. It's a wide picture. And it comes back to that 3 guns again. If you have guns facing in all different directions, you're never going to get a picture. If you have speakers facing all different directions, later on we found out that they bounce off of different subjects. And every time it bounces off of a different object, it changes sound.
Mm-hmm.
The sound that hit that wall, if you measure it beforehand and after, is a completely different sound.
Got it.
That's why so many of the competitors could never get their cars dialed in correctly. And I mean, I just drove around. It was, I was just learning about the car. I didn't have much adjustment to work with or anything like this. And I remember I said, I'm going to upgrade my head end unit into the Sony, the Sony X1P1. And I had to have a dealer do that because it was beyond my ability. And we had to change the whole rack. It just, it was a big project. I said, but I felt there was potential here. As soon as we put the Sony in and I played with this, all of a sudden the mid-ranges were like a picture up on the dashboard. And then the tweeters, and then when I got the tweeters timed out, and they still weren't right. It just wasn't right. The woofers were not bad. I still had the 8-inch woofers in the kick panels.
Right.
And it was better, but it wasn't there, but it was a lot better. And the ability to do an EQ and all this kind of stuff. And luckily my local dealer had an RTA machine. So I could, I could see what I was doing. And well, it worked out very well. And I said, Richard Clark has got this seminar coming up about the TEF machine, the time energy frequency machine.
Mm-hmm.
It would measure what your speakers hit, the objects that they hit before you hear them. Okay. And I'm saying like, I got to drive my car down there. And I went with like 3 people. And we're all in the car, and I had the Milbert amplifiers. I had the vacuum tube amplifiers at that point. When I changed to the Sony, I went to the Milbert tubes.
Okay.
And I remember them telling me that, we've been driving from Philadelphia to North Carolina. We never turned the stereo off once, and they had no fatigue. And they all were competitors. They says, I can't listen to my car for more than a half hour. It just grates on your nerve. Says, right. I've never been in a car like this. And remember, this was the old car. I get down there and Richard looks at it and they're all laughing at my car. I mean, they're literally laughing at me because they said, it looks so stupid. It's, like who puts their stuff on the top of the dashboard? That's why you have kick panels and doors and all this stuff. And I said, Richard, would you listen to it? As soon as it turned on, I could see his face. You could look at his eyes. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't laughing. And he says, can I play this song and this song? He played some Pink Noise and all this stuff. And he says, this car is basically typifying what I'm going to teach at the seminar. With the time delay, he says, that mid-range, the way you have them turned, he says, it's hitting you and no surface beforehand. And the fallout is not much. And then he puts the TEF machine in my car. Before he even started the seminar, he puts the TEF machine in there. He said, your mid-ranges are basically book perfect. They're just right. You're getting the first hit. Says, and your tweeter on this side, your ear is getting the first hit also. Mm-hmm. He says, the other one is a little off angle. He said, the woofers are still bouncing around a little bit. He says, but this is as good as I've measured.
Wow.
And for me, that was, I think I hit on something at that point.
Right.
And I went, and that's when I learned about reflections within the car. That he had cars that he measured, and one had a mid-range that hit 11 surfaces before it hit the guy's ear.
Wow.
And all I kept thinking about was that 3-gun television.
Yeah.
It's going to hit 11 different surfaces. Each one's going to distort it. There'll be no picture of any worth at the end of 11 surfaces.
Sure.
So I know it sounds weird, but it was,
I think most people are on the same page now. It was just, they weren't thinking about it when you were thinking about it.
And the other thing was, when I went to the Milberts, those sound streams were very good solid-state amplifiers, make no doubt about that. They were really good. And the Milberts, when I found out about them, David Burning, the man that invented the Milberts, it was a home audiophile amplifier. That was considered one of the anointed home stereo amplifiers. It was just a great design. And Milbert, what happened was my Milberts had 3 boards in them: a left channel board, a right channel board, and a power supply board. Ends up the left and the right channels are right out of the home amplifier. Milbert didn't have to change a thing. and David Burning didn't have to do a thing. David just designed him a power supply, the middle board. That's it. So you were getting an amplifier that was quite expensive and used on some of the best systems at the time. I mean, this was a hand-built unit. It was really good. And when I put it in, as soon as I turned it on, within minutes, I knew that was another ingredient to the system. It had to have tubes. It became listenable, so that's one of the things. And now remember, I had not gone to the coaxial tweeter yet. And what do? I ripped the A-pillars off, or the pillars for the tweeters. I didn't know how to get them out. I damaged the whole thing because I'm not a mechanic. And I'm like, I had to take it to the BMW deal, and I had to get all new tweeters on one side because I messed up so bad. And I pulled out the BMW tweeter, and I had to tape to it plus a little post. It wasn't easy to do. And I put them in the middle of the mid-range. And I said, this is going to block all the mid-range, because the tweeter was like a 3-inch diameter, and the coil and the speaker was only a 4-inch.
Right.
And I'm thinking, but I just wanted to try it. Well, it was only moved over a few inches from the door pillar to the middle of the speaker. And as soon as I put that on, it was like you hear the stars separate, the clouds separated. And it was like a coherent sound. Yeah. And the other thing was that nobody realized about the car. I moved the woofer crossover a little higher. And needless to say, everybody else tried to move their crossover lower into the 40s and 50s and 60s. Right. And it ended up that the B&W 801, the reason it sounded so good was it crossed over 385 hertz. Oh, wow. From the 13-inch woofer. And what happened was the body of that woofer gave the sound a warm sound. Yeah. But the woofer, the woofer in that car is very special. The B&W woofer, you could take your finger and just flick your finger at it, and the cone will bounce back and forth and back and forth. It's a very loose woofer. And when they designed it, they made it so that the port on the box of the 801 held it in place. Oh, okay. So you had a woofer designed like a mid-range. It was a very different idea, the way it was done. And that's when I said, I'm going to move the crossover point up. That's what I did. And all of a sudden, the tweeter was good. I aligned the tweeter, and I knew I had something there. I knew I had something.
And with having everything up front, you were able to get by with much higher crossover points than the people that had things mounted in the doors or even behind the front seats at that point.
Well, anytime I saw a speaker mounted on the door, I knew it was going to go hit the other door, then it was going to go bounce at the other door. Right. Richard Clark drew drawings of this, of how many surfaces it hit. And your guns and your television are not going to produce this. And then the time alignment. It's going to bounce off a surface, plus it's going to be out of time. How do you get a three-dimensional picture? Yeah. And the other thing was, when I was younger, I also did a lot of near-field listening, because that took the whole room out. My speakers were only a few feet away from me. That was my best sound I always loved. And I said, basically, that's what I have built in this car, is a near-field listening. Right. Near field means that your speakers have to be right on axis with your ears. When you have a near field system, you're sitting maybe 3 feet away from it the most.
Right.
Those speakers are at each of your ears. That's what that car had. No other car that competed had a near field system. Nobody understood they were listening to a near field system.
Yeah.
And all the others, any bounces anywhere, the car, you're never going to get it. Never going to get it. One thing I forgot to talk about was Mike Mineo. Mike Mineo, he had an influence on that car in a way. Everybody, when it came to time alignment, I bought that X1 and the P1, the Sony, because of Mike Mineo.
Okay.
Because I was in New Jersey at a show with my white car before it was even modified or anything like this. And I remember a judge gets in the car, a tall guy, and he says, Mike, the car doesn't sound that good today. Is everything okay? He says, I want to give you a chance to make any changes. Well, Mike gets in the car, and I notice that Mike pushes the seat back up to his tallness.
Mm-hmm.
He says, no. He says, the effing thing sounds perfect. That's the way Mike is. He says, let me sit in again. And he gets in, and I notice that the judge puts the seat all the way back. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. That's a very important fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mike didn't notice it, but I noticed it with my car because I said, the time alignment is way out of whack. But I will tell you that even when I mounted that woofer up, the tweeter, a 3-inch tweeter on a 4-inch woofer, you would never know there was anything blocked from the mid-ranges. It gave me a lot of leeway. And that's when I went to Bauer & Wilkins and I said, there's a whole industry here waiting for your type of product. I wrote out a whole proposal to him, at a business proposal. He gave me all of the speakers. And as my car became more popular in the future, they started calling B&W for speakers. And B&W decided to come out with a line of car audio speakers. And nobody ever knew it, but the speakers were right out of their home speakers.
Okay.
He says, look, all we had to do was put in a box with a label for the mid-range, right. And the 8-inch woofer box the mid-range right out of the 802. He said, and the tweeter is right out of the 801. He says, we didn't even have to make any changes. He says, the only thing we had to make was a plastic case for the tweeter to be mounted on.
Okay.
He says, and that was pretty simple. He says, and we were in the car business. They had a big influence there.
Yeah.
And, like with Dynamat early on, I got a hold of Scott. We worked on the Dynamat. He ended up sponsoring me, and I pushed his product. And all these little ingredients ended up becoming more and more honed in.
Okay. Yep.
And then there were so many holes in this car. I said to my wife, this car, I can't drive this darn thing anymore. It's got so many holes all over the place from everywhere I tried mounting.
Right. And
I said, and my wife says, well, it's your car. And I said, they're going to Florida for a week to my parents. I'm buying a new car while they're away. So I go to the dealership. It's been snowing for a week. Everything's ice. Nobody's even set foot in this dealership. And this little guy shows up to their front door. And there was a red BMW there. I'd never seen a red 540. And I bought it at a great price because nobody was there.
Right.
Nobody was there. And that's when I started laying out the final, what I wanted to do.
And now you kind of had a idea of how you wanted to design the system, not just the components.
Correct. And
within it,
a lot of things that we tried in the car, like when I did this, I tried the 15-inch woofer, just playing around with it in the other car.
Okay.
Just temporary, fitting it.
Right.
Because at that point, B&W had gone along with this. I still had a lot more designing. And then I went back to Mike Mineo and I said, it's very important that whoever sits in this seat has got to sit at the right point.
Right.
I was with my dad. And he was in the poultry business, and I was there with Frank Perdue. I don't know if you know that name, the chicken guy. He's a big chicken company back east.
Okay.
And he was showing something at the Wharton School of Business. He was giving a class, and he was using a laser pointer. And I'm looking like, that's how I'm going to put him in the right place. I'm going to buy a laser pointer. I'm going to mount it in the car, have it pointed exactly where my ear is, and everybody's going to sit exactly where I sit. That was a major point.
Yeah, for sure.
Major point. And nobody ever knew it. That laser also, it skimmed. Once I got that in the right position, it hit a certain part of the pole, the post that the microphone was mounted on.
Yeah.
So they put the post in. I said, let me just move it to be sure. I always had the microphone in the exact same position in my red car at every single contest, aligned by laser. Nobody ever realized it. And, at every competition, oh, your RTA's off, your microphone's bad. Out of every show that I ever went to for all those years, not one single show gave me a different curve than the one I designed. It was always...
Because you had it perfectly placed.
Correct. I had all the speakers, the tweeters and the mids, facing directly at the center of that microphone, not bouncing anywhere.
Right.
And the woofers, the same thing, and the same position. Every single solitary show. And I remember there were almost fights at some of the shows. Your microphone's not good, and me, I'm not saying a word. I'm not, I don't need Minio. I don't need Minio after me. And sometimes Minio didn't realize, but his seat was in the wrong position. I knew it.
Right.
But I didn't want to say anything to him. The guy would smack me or something like that. And then we moved on, and I found Henry. And Henry is a very special guy. He's different from most of the others for an unusual reason. Most of the car audio people work in wood. Henry works in metal. Okay? I didn't appreciate that fact at first. I didn't understand it.
Right.
But as I got to know him, I understood how important that fact was. When we made all the stuff for the batteries, he didn't buy it. He machined everything. I got so many extra points for that. I told him, I said, I want the woofers, the mid-ranges here. I want them up on the dashboard, and I my nice cabinet and everything. He looks at me and says, how about if I build you an elevator and bring both of them up from underneath the dashboard? I'm looking like,
do what?
Are you smoking dope or something like that? How do you do that? Because I had seen the actuators, and they were, they had just started to have actuators.
Right.
And they were very long, and they wouldn't have fit under the dashboard. He says, no, I'll build an elevator that it lifts within its own length. And I said, explain that again? Elevator that lifts within its own length. And I'm like, okay, if you feel that's okay. He gave me a price. It was more expensive. He says, I'm going to build the boards. He says, because on the driver's side, it won't fit up. He says, so what's going to happen? The speaker's going to go up, and then the tweeter's going to rotate in position. I said, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. I mean, it's like, you crazy? And I said, how are you going to do the dash? And he says, I'm going to open the dash up and then put a machined metal ring. He says, so the dash will keep its shape because the dash is just foam.
Right.
And needless to say, he made the gears by hand.
Wow.
People didn't understand that. He didn't buy any parts. All he did was bought a little model electric motor. It was a little thing that you put in a model. And he made his own gear for it. He put the threaded thing to catch the shaft of the motor. And then he built a gear for the thing to go up and down. He machined every tooth. Nobody ever knew that because they didn't see any of it. He had the limit switches in here, and I'm saying, like, this is unbelievable.
So that's why it was so smooth compared to what people were accustomed.
Well, no, that nothing would have fit. Nothing else would have fit.
Well, yeah, but so many of the actuators ended up being jerky and loud and everything too. Beyond just fitting.
Yeah,
it seemed like those were coming from another world when they were introduced.
When they would come up and turn, I'm saying, "Oh, throw away the Playboy. I got something better." It was that bad. It was like. My wife would say, what are you doing in that car?
Watching my tweeters go up and down.
Needless to say, he's working on that. It took long.
Mm-hmm.
And, I pushed him a lot. I pushed him too much, actually. I was an impatient guy. And then I'd go up there and help him. And no matter what I did, it made more work for him. I remember one time I said, oh, Henry, I'll just vacuum the car out. I'll get this, I'll give you a hand. He says, okay. And he had just vacuumed up some of the stuff from the lathe he had, all the aluminum chips.
Mm-hmm.
I put it in the vacuum cleaner. I put it in the blow hose, and it puts chips all over the car. It blew all the chips and oil all over the car. He says, it's going to take me a day to clean all that. He says, you can't rub, And it was just, I was there all the time. I shouldn't have been, but he was he's a good guy. He likes quality, likes a certain way. I just wasn't used to it. So,
Right.
but in the end, it worked out very well. And then the other thing was we needed a woofer amplifier. I couldn't use the sound streams anymore.
Right.
Not for these, not for the big woofers.
Right.
And I remember before I bought the BMW, I didn't know if I was going to buy another BMW because I liked the Audi A6. It was such a beautiful car at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I remember here's me going into the Audi dealer or Haverford Pike, carrying my 13-inch woofer, and that was one of the things. The woofer had to fit the car. And the guys look at me and says, "Are you freaking crazy?" Like, yeah, I'm not buying this car unless this woofer fits in the fender. It's just weird. And then I went over to the Volvo dealer with my woofer.
Right.
And then I went over to the Mercedes-Benz dealer with my woofer. And the only one that fit was the BMW, the car I had.
That's funny.
Just said, like, what do you want? With comfortable seats. I like a car. No,
I need this woofer to fit.
I need the woofer. But, another thing that happened that was very obvious, that this woofer was very loose. And it was done that way purposely. And we went free air into the fender.
Right.
And I knew after the first car, we were going to make it different. And Henry says, "I don't think you should use wood on that woofer to mount it." He said, "I'm going to take a 1/4-inch steel plate, weld that to the car and thread it, and you'll mount the woofer to the car so it becomes part of the car."
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand. He didn't understand how powerful that statement.
Yeah.
Until we turned it on. And when he hit a bass note, we tried him at first, the whole car shuddered. And people that have heard my car always talk about this. When you hit the bass in the front, it came through the car.
Yeah.
Because it was part of the car.
Yeah.
In my next car, when we made that other when we changed the system, they mounted it with wood. It lost everything.
Wow.
It was the metal attaching to the car was so powerful. It shook the car in such a way. And the car had close to 300 pounds of dynamite.
Right.
I mean, we had two of the silver-plated ones, and I put another coat over there. It was a quiet car. And, it was like a tank. And then we played with some amplifiers, and we realized that the guy in England told me, the guy who designed the 801,
mm-hmm.
which was the man who helped me with the car, he says, I designed that woofer that the enclosure would hold it in place. He says, but if you're going to free air, you need an amplifier that is not just powerful, it has to have a high damping rate to hold that woofer in place. And it should be fast. You know what I mean by a slew rate of an amplifier?
Yeah.
It's how fast an amplifier can react. So I said, okay, I got to start looking around for an amplifier. We tried a few of them, the standard bring-ins. And I got to tell you, it didn't have much luster. They just didn't light me up at all. And I tried the Orions. I tried the MTXs. I tried the ones with the fancy drawings on it that was made in Phoenix.
PPI.
Precision amplifiers. And tried some other stuff. And it just didn't get me. And for some reason, I was at one of the shows and Zapco was there. And I didn't really know about Zapco. I only knew, it was almost like the high-end home products.
Right.
I didn't know who they were. And he's showing me that we have separate power supplies for our amplifiers and our preamps. I'm looking like, this is serious stuff. I didn't, but I had never seen it anywhere. Nobody else had it.
Right.
Nobody carried it. No competitors had it. I called the guy up, and he was the head engineer. And I'm talking to him, and I said, what do you use as a reference for your amplifiers that you designed? That was important to me. He said, I have a full Mark Levinson system here in the lab. He says, it has to equal. And I said, which amplifier? And it was not the Harman Kardon Mark Levinson stuff.
Right.
It was the real Mark Levinson.
Right.
He gave me the name. I said, oh my God, this is a serious guy. When I ask all the others, when I ask MTX, it's, we just have some speakers here.
Right.
And you found out it was for a price. They made it for a price.
Sure.
And it was just for a lot of boom and bang. But this car was not about that.
Right.
And he says, we have a new amplifier. It says, I'll be able to ship in about another 2 weeks. He says, and it's all surface mount technology. And I said, those little tiny things, those little tiny resistors and things like that. I said, you got to be kidding me. You are using surface mount in a car stereo amplifier. He says, yep. He says, we're going to be the first. I said, that is really like high level. He says, yes, and we've done this and this. And I said, can you tell me what are the specifications of this? He gave me the damping factor. And I said, are you sure about that?
Yeah,
And I
because
said,
it was way beyond
it was
any other amp at
way
the
beyond.
time.
And remember, at
Yeah.
PPI, I had to get a hold of the engineer. He didn't even know it off the top of his head, what is slew or the damping rate or anything. And when he gave me the numbers, they were single digits.
Right.
And the slew rate was so slow. This guy gives it to me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is lightning fast.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of control. And he says, you can mono it. He says, so I would recommend get 2 amplifiers, mono each one, and that's how you do it.
Right.
I said, okay. So I bought them. He didn't give them to me for free or anything like that, but I had seen all these other amplifiers opened, and they look normal. When I got that Zapco, it didn't look like a car audio amplifier.
Right.
It looked like a very high-end esoteric piece of equipment. And the other thing was it was a 4-layer circuit board. And up till this day today, I can't figure out how to get 4 layers on a circuit board. But he says it's mostly on very high-level stuff. So now we had everything. And I think we had the new XES at that point. We took the old system out.
Right.
It was just changing around systems. And I remember Henry says, there's a sound off near us in another like 3 weeks. I said, well, let's go to it. He says, I don't know if I'm going to be done, but I'm going to try. The time comes, and I'm there the morning of the show. He's still putting the system in the morning of the show. There was no left kick panel, no right kick panel, no covers or grills for the speakers up on the dashboard. And he said, Earl, sit in the car and adjust it. And I said, I've never adjusted the car yet. This was my first time I ever adjusted the car. We go to the show, and I remember they pull up because nobody knew I had a new car coming. And I think they were all surprised. And there's Minio. He says, what's this? I said, it's my new car. He looks like, where'd you get this car? And it was a beautiful looking car. But it had the stock wheels. It wasn't fully outed yet.
Right.
And needless to say, he sits in it, and I could see his face. I could see it I was in the back seat. He sat in the front. I could see it in the rearview mirror. He knew there was something special about this car.
Wow.
And he says, pretty nice, like something like that. And he was okay with it. He wasn't okay by the end of the show because I got best of show with no grills, no nothing. And I won my class, and he's like, oh, shit, what the heck is this?
Right.
What the heck is this car? Henry was elated, and I let a lot of people in the car to hear it. It was very different for them. Remember, Mike had never heard a system with the speakers up on the dashboard. Nobody had. It was really something. We took it back to Henry's, and he finished everything up, and then I started competing. But, in the meantime, remember, there was a lot of things going on. I forgot to mention with straight wire. When I first did when I was going to do the red car, I called him up. I knew him from home stereo, and I loved the look of his cable. And I said to Steve, have you ever thought about car audio systems, cables? He says, no, I'm home stereo. He says, I do home stereo.
Mm-hmm.
I give him a whole pitch. He says, okay. He sends me all the cables, and this was not cheap cables in that car. Not at all. They were the very thick ones.
Right.
Within a year, he had an entire division just for car audio. It worked out good. The same with those batteries, the spiral batteries. When I did the white car, I was in California on the business. I visited their headquarters and said, there's a business in car audio. And he says, really?
This was Optima or?
Optima batteries.
Yeah.
And I said, why don't you sponsor me? Needless to say, I got 2 batteries. It was originally the white car, and then we transferred over to the other.
Okay.
So companies found their way with this car.
Yeah.
And the funny story was the Zapco was spectacular. Nobody had ever heard bass like that up front. it was fast
Mm-hmm.
and it was in your face.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not loose or anything like this. It was spectacular. Let's put it that way. And I learned how to tune the car, but I think I had 80% of the tuning the first time.
Wow.
And to tune that car only would ever, I wouldn't have to tune that car every week. All these other people were tuning the cars constantly.
Right.
I tune it once every 5, 6, 7 shows at the most. And it took 5 minutes. You put on the pink noise, you move your time delay back and forth, and that's it. It's the same curve the whole time.
During that time, too, you were probably one of the more predominant or first ones to really start focusing on tuning just for the driver's seat, too, right?
Well, that brings up another subject. People didn't realize, I was a business person. I had a trucking company, all with trucks all along the East Coast. And, I had to drive. This car was my everyday driver.
Yeah.
I'd go visit my drivers. I'd show up at 5 a.m. when they were supposed to be somewhere just to surprise them. I'd have to go visit customers and things like that.
Right.
But what happened, this was the most unusual thing about this car. People didn't realize that I had it only for the driver's seat because I was driving it all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of my competitors towed their cars to shows.
Right.
I was driving through the snow, the rain, everything. It didn't bother me.
Mm-hmm.
When we go take the kids to Disney World, we take my car, drive down there. So, for me to make it for 2 seats, I had no interest in it.
Right.
But I got to tell you, I got the car back from Henry, and I go to visit a customer, a very large customer. And I had been trying to get an appointment with this guy. This is like the weirdest thing about this car. This car made me so much money. Nobody ever knew that. And I remember I was trying to get an appointment with this company, and finally, I couldn't even get an appointment to come to this office. I said, "How about if I take you to lunch?" He says, "Okay, let's go to lunch." So I go up there. I'm in the door. They don't even let me in the building. They let me just in the lobby. He comes out. We walk outside. And he looked at Paul, a young guy in his 20s. He was head of all transportation for this company. And they used to do maybe 100 trailer loads a day. That's a lot for one factory. And we're walking down the aisle to my car. He says, "Wow, look at that red car. Oh, that is like the coolest car." And at that point, I had those new 3-spoke Antera wheels. The drug dealer wheels, I call them.
Right.
Kids would come up. "Oh, I see the wheels. I thought you drove drugs." And he looks at the car. I said, "That's my car." I said, "You want it?" And I thought real quick. I said, "You want to drive it to lunch?" He says, "I've never driven a BMW." He was probably driving a K car or something like that. And the 540 was considered a pretty nice car at that time. I said, "Go ahead in." So I give him I throw him the keys. He gets in. I get in the passenger seat. He turns on the key, and the speakers rise up out of the dashboard. He's looking like, what the hell is this? And the music comes on.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, his face turns very sad.
Mm.
And I didn't know what was going on. And I said, "Is there anything wrong?" He says, "No." He says, "My dad just passed away. And he had a Macintosh stereo at home. And we used to listen to it together all the time."
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I said, "Come on, you want to see the back?" I said, "I've got tubes in this car." He looks at the trunk, and you could see when he saw the tubes, it was like a sadness, because he lost his dad. And we weren't talking, and I'm looking like, wait a minute, what's going on here? I got to talk about trucks. And we get back in the car, we drive to lunch. He didn't say a word coming from the plant to where we're eating lunch. And we got to lunch. He says, "Let me tell you about my dad. He used to buy records and all this stuff." And I said to myself, I am not going to mention a word about my rates or my company or my sales pitch or anything during lunch unless he brings it up. He talked the whole lunch about his father and the family and everything like this.
Wow.
And we get back to the plane. He drives back. He says, "You have your rates in the front seat of the car." He looks at them. He says, "Your rates are pretty much right in there." He says, "You have your telex machine." At that point, we had a telex. That's how he communicated. That's how they drop orders to you, through a telex machine.
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Yeah, here's my telex machine." He said, "Send me a certificate of insurance. I'll start sending you orders."
Wow.
He ended up to be, in today's dollars, $2 to $3 million account.
All you had to do is turn on the system.
And I drove away, and I'm saying, like, what the hell happened here?
Right.
Well, it happened again. I went to a contest. I said, you know what? I wanted to go to a stereo contest up in Methuen, Massachusetts. It was a big one. I needed some points. So I said, I'm going to drive up there. I haven't been up to Massachusetts. And then I'll do my appointments on Monday for to my trucking people.
Right.
So I go to the contest. Nobody had ever seen the car up there. Everybody was getting in the car. I won best of show. And, I was winning almost every one of them. I was winning first place because all the grills were on and it really looked a lot better. And I had an appointment at Friendly's Ice Cream, which is like a Haagen-Dazs ice cream in Boston. And I remember I walked in the guy's office, and he looked like one of these old Navy guys or Army guys. Had a flat shaved head, on the top it was all flat. You could put a level on the top, and his head was level.
Right.
And he's got his arms crossed.
Oh boy!
And in sales terms, when his arms are crossed, he's not listening to you.
Right.
And I look up on the wall, and he's got like 5 or 6 Thunderbirds models, and then he's got a picture of him next to his Thunderbird.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm going to try something. I don't know if this is going to work. I start talking Thunderbirds to him. I said, "Oh, you collect Thunderbirds?" All of a sudden, the arms come undone. He was relaxed.
Yeah.
And I noticed that right away. And we're talking. I says, "You got to see my car." He says, "What do you mean?" Because he had done custom work to his Thunderbirds.
Mm-hmm.
We go outside, and man, he just couldn't believe what he saw. He says, "I didn't even know they had things like this." "Oh, no, it's just brand new. I just got it out of the shop like a few weeks ago. I designed it, had this guy build it for you." I walked away with the account. He says, "You know what? When you have trucks in the area, you call me. No problem." And I'm looking like I must be smoking dope or something like this. And I'm going to shows. I'm winning. I'm sharing all my information because everybody in home audio shared.
Yeah.
So I didn't keep any secrets from anybody.
Right.
Everything was right in front. And it happened at Dan and Yogurt. Another one. I mean, these are big accounts.
Right.
You go to Dan and Yogurt, he's got Corvette. He was a Corvette guy. And I said, "Oh, you got to come outside." He comes out, he almost split a rib just looking at this car. And he said, and we're listening. He says, while we're listening, he says, "Give me your presentation." And I'm presenting my trucks, my prices, the places I go in the front seat of the car. He says, "You got any trucks next week?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'll send you some orders." Until I realized that all the truck guys were young people. So this car, not only for competing, it was bringing multi-million dollars into my business. I'll tell you the best one. I'll tell you the last one was M&M Mars. The people, the chocolate company.
Yeah.
That is like one of the top companies to get. So I had talked to the headquarters. I just finished with them. And he says, "Well, I'm not dealing with you yet." He says, "But everybody that we think that could become a carrier for M&M, we want you to go out to the warehouse, meet our people, see if it fits your trucking company."
Sure.
So he said he calls out to the warehouse and says, "Look, Earl Zausmer is going to be coming out there and show him around. He's a potential trucker." And I'm sure they get plenty of these. I get out of his office, which was in Hackensack, and the warehouse was about a half hour away. I get on the phone and I call my dispatcher back at the office, and I said, "Tom, call this guy. Here's his number. He's the guy at the warehouse. Tell him I got to call the office. I got an important message. His beeper's not working." And so have him call in, and, "Oh, by the way, you got to see the car he's driving. Oh, it's got like one of the best stereo systems in it, and it's sort of loud. It goes boom like this." And he starts talking. He says, "And it was just featured in a magazine. And it's really big." He says, "Okay, I'll give him the message." I pull up to the M&M warehouse. There's got to be 50 doors, for trucks.
Right.
And there's like 8 to 11 people waiting outside that door on the steps. And they're waiting for me.
Why?
Because they wanted to see this car.
Right.
I sat there and demoed it to every single one of their guys.
Wow.
When I tell you, and then I opened the trunk. 2 days later, I get a call from the guy from M&M's. He says, you must have made a really big impression upon these people. We're going to put you on our list of carriers. It was
just by showing up with the car.
It was the craziest thing. So, it really helped a lot, and surprising things. But, people
thought you were spending time doing sound offs out of your main time, and it was really just
business.
Part of your sales trip.
It was business. That's why people said, oh, it was easier to do one seat. No, I did it because I drove that car to all these appointments,
right,
to see my drivers on the coldest, rainiest, snowiest day, to check up that their trucks were being kept in good shape, that the trailers were good,
right,
to take customers out to lunch. That's why it was like that. And again, I did this. I visited sound offs in places where I wanted to go see customers or I needed new customers. And the same deal, it worked through. And, funny thing was, we were down in South Carolina. Remember there was a big sound off in South Carolina where Richard Clark and MTX had that monster-sized woofer. Remember that big thing?
Oh, and yeah, I've seen it.
It didn't work. It didn't work that time. And everybody kept asking me, what CDs are you listening to? Your car sounds so good. And they were all these obscure type of artists. Now, remember, that was part of the key of what you were listening to.
Right.
Those CDs in my car were made by Maple Shade Recording.
Mm-hmm.
Maple Shade Recording uses reel-to-reel tape. And he recorded every one of those CDs in his living room. So what happened was the car sounded like his living room. Later on, I introduced Maple Shade and Chesky and all the others to Richard Clark. I said, Richard, the stuff you're using on your Iasca disc, it's got to be updated. It's too cold. It's too sterile. He said, well, send me what you think is good. And if you notice, Rebecca Pigeon and all these other ones ended up on the disc. And it brought to people that their systems can sound better. Here was another company that made money from my car. I called Maple Shade and I said, I'm going to a show in South Carolina. I said to Pierre at Maple Shade, why don't you come down and take a booth, and I'm going to let people know that it's your recordings. And I've been letting people know it's recordings because I give them the name of the groups and they can't find them anywhere because they're one person.
Right.
And one of the groups comes up and it's in his house in the middle of nowhere. And the guy pulls up in a big, long black Cadillac. He says, where's the studio? He says, it's my living room. Are you kidding me? Really? And a lot of people that recorded there live there.
Oh, really?
What he did was he was a different kind of guy. Like there was a guy that did a drum solo. And he says, when you're ready, you tell me when you're ready to record. He did it the opposite of other people that said, you got to be in the recording at 9 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And Pierre told me his story. He says he wakes me up at like 10:30 at night. And he says, I'm ready to record, this drum solo. He said, don't turn on the lights. So Pierre just gets his flashlight, and his tape deck was run by batteries. He turns it on. The guy does a 30-minute stint, the whole half of the CD at one take, no second take, 2 microphones. Pierre turns the lights on. He's filled with sweat. He says the other guys that did like Rolling Stone, Papa was a Rolling Stone, I used to play a lot.
Right.
He said they just stayed at his house for a while. And and he didn't even force them. They asked his wife, Pierre's wife, like, does he want us to record? He didn't know. He says,
when are we going to get working?
Yeah, he says, whenever you're ready. And they weren't used to that.
Wow.
And as a result, Pierre captured beautiful music that you heard in the car. And even his microphone cables were soldered to the tape machine. He didn't believe in connectors.
Wow.
And the wire from the microphones, coming out, the shielded wire, was one single strand, like as thick as a hair. He felt that if he used multiple wires or thicker wires, it wouldn't work. So it was all one enclosed in an inner tube, soldered at one end and soldered at the other. And then when he would have the tapes converted to digital, he would go to New York and they would sample him 5 to 6 analog to digital converters. He'd pick the best sounding and come out. But I told him, I said, Pierre, come on down here. He walks into this contest, and this was one of the loudest conventions we ever had. He says, I can't believe it. And he drives down in his Maple Mobile, I call it. It was an old K car. He filled the trunk with CDs from the brim. He didn't know what to expect. By the end of the show, he says, Earl, I sold everything. He says, I don't have a single CD. He said they even bought the 3 demo CDs I was playing on headphones. He said, I have nothing to go home with. He says, the dealers that have these car audio dealerships, they were buying the whole series, like 10 or 12 CDs at a time. He made them a special deal. If you bought more than 5, it was only this much. And all these dealerships all across the United States got his CDs, and they started playing these CDs for their customers in the showroom.
Wow.
And he was getting calls from them saying, I am selling more stereo systems in cars because of your CDs. I was using junky material before. When you have new stuff, let me know and I'll buy it. He said, during that period, I sold more to the car audio people than at the Consumer Electronics Show and all the home audio dealers anywhere.
Wow.
And it became a business for him. So it's like, whoever knew? And then another thing happened at that show. A woman from Bose Audio shows up. Very beautiful woman. She was VP of sales for Bose. And she walks out to me and she's in high heels. I'm like, what? She's dressed up in a suit. And I'm looking like, what are you doing here? She introduced herself, says, everybody tells me this is the card here. And I said, that's nice. I said, why don't you get in? And I sit in the back seat, and she says, well, could you just play something for me? Well, I turn on some of the maple shades, and she says to me, take a look at my arm. And all the hair on her arm was standing up. She says, I've never heard anything like this card. And I turned it off, and the speakers went up and down.
Right.
And she said, would you mind bringing this up to Massachusetts and to meet Dr. Bose? And I said, sure, no problem on that. And I met him, actually.
Wow.
And, if you notice, some of the older Bose had elevators, like on the tweeters.
Yeah. Right.
You wonder where that came from. Unfortunately, my father was not Gene Simmons that would patent and trademark everything. I would have patented and trademarked to lift any tweeter or woofer or mid-range that was in the front of the car. And then Mercedes came out with the front woofer. I don't know if you've seen the new Mercedes.
Yeah, the firewall.
In the firewall. Yeah.
Yep.
So, it was all frontal. I should have patented, but I didn't have a father that we didn't do that. But if Gene Simmons was my father,
you would have been set.
He would have been, it was an Earl, that thing lifted up, patented, right there. And we just met people, and the car progressed. And then the last one was when I changed the trunk into more gold, the zebra wood, the tiptoes to hold the amplifiers. Oh, it's just, just a lot of shows. And we really had a good time with the car. Everybody profited from the car. Everybody liked it. And the car has a very large following. For years, my wife will even tell you that, we had people calling here, could you help me? I'm building a car. And I want it to sound like your car. And I'm sure people at the show in West Virginia, there are people that, I've heard my car. And many of them set the goals to, I want something that sounds like that. And now in Indonesia, the weirdest thing, this guy messages me from Indonesia. His name is Yutando. And he says, I'm into car stereo and all this stuff. And he's quite a serious guy. And he wanted more details. And I talked to him. It was a little hard to talk to him. I explained to him the advantages of up on the dashboard and all this stuff. And he says, I've heard all these people. And many big guys have gone over to Indonesia to go meet this man. There's pictures of the Magic Van. John went over there. One of my competitors went over there. They're welcome with open arms. I haven't gone there. When I go to Singapore, maybe next year, maybe I'll stop over. Needless to say now, when you get on Yutanda's website, on his Facebook, you see all these cars, and they're all speakers up on the dashboard. Everything. It's like one after the other. And it's like they're so clean. Their workmanship is so perfect. And this Yutanda bought Milberts. He got a pair of Milberts. And he'll tell you, he says, my system's never sounded like this. He says, having it up on the dashboard is the best way. And now you see these people, they got ribbons up on the dashboard. They got all these, they've really advanced. I tried to do good for the industry. I tried to be open. I never was one of these guys that said, no, you can't see what I'm doing. But the secrets was the directness of the speaker, the vacuum tubes, having the straight wire cable helped quite a lot. Having that Zapco amplifier that was so fast and the attaching it to the car was a big, big thing. And then the XES and the high crossover. All these things made for a sound. And so many people, when I would go to different sound offs, every once in a while I'd take people to my sound offs. Like down in, like I go to Prairie, I took 2 or 3 other people.
Right.
Same thing. They get in the car, and hours later they said, we're still listening to them. Not tired of the sound. It's so nice. And the other thing was, when you're near field, like I was, you don't even need rear speakers. I had rear speakers in the car, and after a while we just turned them off. There was no need for that. So no need for more reflections.
Right.
It was a very simple system, and people could build this kind of system today in a new car.
For sure.
They really could. But whatever happened to the car?
Right.
Whatever happened to the BMW? This is like the lost, what do you call it? Like the lost something? We moved to Arizona. The first day we get to Arizona, the car melted.
Oh.
All the rugs and carpets from the back. It was 122 degrees the first day the car arrived in. 122 and it had been.
Wow.
And the guy slept in Arizona, so the car had been cooking for a while.
Right.
I opened up the trunk and all the carpet had peeled away. It ended up that when you're in Arizona in hotter climates, you use a little different glue than you do back east.
Right.
Everything peeled away, and I looked at the pods up front, cracked in half. Turned the system on, and it just blew the fuse out. It was just, when it arrived, it was in shambles. Let's put it that way. But I got it at least working a little bit better. And I remember I went to a sound off in Tucson, my first one, a few days after we got there. And we pull up, and everybody is around the car on all 4 sides. And I say, "Is this the car? Is this the car?" I said, "Yeah, it's my car." No, is this the car? And we realized that there were people out here that knew this car. We didn't know if they would know this car. It was famous here. But what happened was I put a new system in there I thought was going to be better, the new BMW with the 6-inch mid, the newer tweeter, and the bigger woofer, but it never sounded as good. The speakers were designed by Lawrence Dickey, the new designer, and they were turning more towards modern speakers, which were more analytical, more correct, and they weren't warm. They just didn't do it. And the install was horrible. Even after the car was taken apart, we didn't realize how bad the install was. So the best times was the first system. But some guy, I just mentioned it somewhere that I was going to sell the car. And the car, everybody wondered, like, "Earl, where'd your car go?" I said, "Well, I sold it to some guy in Boise, Idaho." And the guy picks it up, pays for it through the credit union, gave me a check, everything was okay. Guy calls me like 2 days later. He says, "Earl, on the way home, I hit every stereo shop." He says, "They all think I'm Earl." He says, "Everyone here, they want to listen to the car." He says, "It took me an extra day to get home. This guy brought his friends down, and he was like in heaven." He says, "This is like the greatest thing." And I tell him this story about, people would see, customers would see it. And what did he do? He sold expensive vacuum cleaners. Okay?
Had nothing to do with audio.
Had nothing to do with audio. And you put water in it, and it filtered the Thunderbird or something like that. It was very expensive. Really expensive vacuum cleaner.
Right.
He says, "I did what you told me." He says, "They came out in my car." He says, "They bought a vacuum cleaner."
Went from selling truckloads to vacuum cleaners.
It was the funniest thing. And I said, "Who do you sell vacuum cleaners to?" He says, "People in house trailers." I said, "Get out of here." He says, "No." He says, "We do homes sometimes." He says, "But people in house trailers, they don't know how to spend money." He says, "They'll spend $600 on a vacuum cleaner." I said, "You got to be kidding me." He says, "No." So I take the car every time I go on an appointment.
That's funny.
And needless to say, it was something with him because he didn't make a single payment on the car for a while. And they repossessed the car, and he sued the finance company. The car sat in a warehouse for multiple years. multi
Oh,
years.
wow.
Just sat there. Nobody checked the battery. Nothing. They didn't even cover the car. They just put it in one of these warehouses where they store while cases are being settled or, legal cases are being taken care of. A few years later, they finally settled the case. And the man who takes care of all these vehicles to get rid of them, like, hey, we've got a car that's been sitting here for 4 years. This one,
Right.
it was used in a robbery. It's ready to be sold and all this stuff. And needless to say, this guy from the insurance company calls one of his people, said, I got a special car here. He says, it's a red BMW with these 3-spoke wheels. or something like that. Or like it's got like stuff that comes out of the, like there's holes in the dashboard or something like that. He says, the car, the car's red, right? Yeah. He says, open the trunk. He says, I opened it. He says, like all this gold stuff. He says, I'll take it. The guy knew the car, apparently.
Wow.
And he sold it to somebody else in California, which from what I hear was a singer of some type or a musician.
Okay.
The guy who bought the car knew what the car was.
Right.
He took it home. He had to get some things repaired on it because it had been sitting for so long. It hadn't been driven. It needed work. If you just leave a car there. And he had the car, loved the car. I had never talked to the man or anything like this. And he had a heart attack or something happened to him. And he ended up that he was very sick. And he didn't want to be without the sound of the car. So they drilled holes in the bottom of the car to feed his oxygen tank through the bottom of the car because the car couldn't move. He couldn't drive.
What?
And he would sit in the car. The car was hooked up to an outlet and a 12-volt, big 12-volt power supply he had. And he would sit in the car all day while breathing oxygen, listening to the music in that car. He loved it so much.
Wow.
And then what happened is he got really sick and he found me. And he says, I bought your car. And he told me the whole story. He says, I'm getting sick to a point I can't even get in the car anymore. He says, it has to go to somebody else and bring them pleasure. And I called Mike Milbert. He went out there, bought the car. And on the way back, he stopped by my place. None of the settings were in the Sony system. Everything had been erased. I reset it, and I just did it by ear. And I'll tell you, I forgot how potent that car was, even with that newer system. I mean, it's just like it was shocking after not hearing one of these kind of systems. And Milbert had it, and he put it in a showroom somewhere in Maryland for a little while. And then after a while, he took it out, and it just sat outside for years, outside of his garage. Just sat there. And then just lately, a man here, Mike, he had a shop in Buffalo. We've been friends, and he says, my lifelong goal was to build a car that sounded like yours.
Wow.
And he had a great shop up in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And he says, I could buy your old car. And I said, well, it's a BMW. You could buy somebody else's BMW. You don't have to pay extra. But Milbert sold him the car for about what the car cost.
Okay.
So he says, I got all the equipment for free. I said, but the car's got a lot of holes in it and everything.
Right.
He brought it back. And needless to say, he was glad he did because now he's rebuilding the car.
Oh, wow.
And he is a master perfectionist.
Awesome.
Master perfectionist. And he works in metal. And the car is going to be better than ever. The two of us are working on the car, the design. He took the woofers from what we used to have, which were, the grills that covered the woofers.
Right.
Were only grills from 3.5-inch speakers. So the whole 13-inch woofer was coming out through a 3.5-inch opening. He now is opening the whole thing up. We're just hoping the car doesn't collapse in the center, and we're, like one of those candid camera cars.
Yeah, as long as the car stays together to fit the system, and you'll be good.
The Milberts, he's got the Milberts. They're in great shape. The XES system's going to be there. He has collected B&W speakers like nobody I've seen. He's got, I think, maybe 8, 10, 12 mid-ranges.
Wow.
And then he's got like 6 or 8 woofers of my car.
Wow.
All finding him for people that had old speakers. He'd say, you keep the cabinet,
right.
I'll take the speakers. And then at the factory, they cleaned out some room, found 2 more speakers that had never been used. He bought them. He's got a collection. I'm afraid that if the guy passes away, they're going to bury him with the speakers.
Is he keeping the zebra wood in there?
Yes. Oh, yes. It looks very nice.
Awesome.
And he's rebuilding it like this. And he's really one of the most talented guys I've ever met. And he understands sound. He knows what he wants. And this has been a dream of his. And he's not the only guy. There's many people that have heard that car that left a big impression. And many of them hearing it said, now they heard Earl's car, I know what I want to achieve.
Right.
That was the difference between me and all the other competitors. I had home audio and I knew what sound I wanted.
Yeah.
When most of the other guys were just saying, well, I want to put a 12-inch, but they didn't know the end. It's like when you build a company, it's like saying, well, I'm just going to start a company. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. Just as I go, I'll try it. You have to have a goal.
Right.
And I knew my goal in the car. So it is done. So the car is like a magical thing that's done a lot for many companies. It's done for many people. It has brought me business for my family. It has brought enjoyment to endless people at the shows. And I know people thought I was odd because there was only one seat, but unlike other people that would trailer their car in and everything, I drove it every day. I mean, I remember going up to the show in Canada, and I come there and the whole car, one of my fenders was filled with snow. I'd take the fenders off, empty the snow out of the fenders, and clean the car up. And they had a hose outside, but the hose was frozen, so I had to keep moving the hose until the ice would melt in there.
Right.
And everybody else's car is so clean because they trailered it up there. And it was nice that before they would start the show, the head judge would say, could I put all my judges through your car? I said, here's the CDs, you know how to work it. And all the judges would sit in my car first, just so they knew what to listen for.
Oh.
And that was really good. I enjoyed that. So
it sounds like you were definitely more of the mindset that I think a lot of people say they want to have, or maybe say they do have, but of the competition was a secondary or even third part of what you're after with it. You truly knew what you wanted. You made it for you. You made it for your own enjoyment and to share with others. And, whatever the byproducts of the competition were byproducts, that wasn't the focus.
No. And, there were shows that there were 2 or 3 shows that I purposely threw. There was one in the Carolinas one day. And I remember I drove down there and my car was really the big car. There was no question about that. There was nice cars, but all these people said, we've seen this in magazines and we've never heard it. Can we hear it? And there was a guy in my class and he was crippled. He was in very bad shape.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see, he did a lot of this work himself. It wasn't up to standard. And I told the judge, I said, whatever you do, give me the worst scores you can. I said, this is a guy that worked a lot harder than me. And you know what? It didn't bother me to do that. And he won the show,
mm-hmm.
And I did that on 2 other occasions. You don't need to win. And some guys would say, oh, you got all this money to do this. It wasn't about money. It was I liked good sound.
Right.
And I could advance the art of car audio.
Sure.
And I could take the sound I could take my home stereo with me. Because remember, when I started really getting on the road, the goal was that I didn't want to leave my home system.
Right.
That was, as an audiophile, 2 days without a car, with the home system, you're this way. And my goal was to get the car to sound somewhat like home.
Right.
But it ended up that the car was so superior, I had no interest in home stereo. And I remember I took my car stereo friends to New York. We went to the Stereophile show at the Waldorf Astoria.
Mm-hmm.
And they had never been to a home stereo show. We went through it. And they were looking at all these special cables and all these cookaboo, all these things and the horn speakers and everything. And they all walked away and says, do you know that all of our cars sound better than every stereo here? So it was nice. And
crazy when it reverses.
And you met a lot of people, and it was nice having meals with them.
Yeah.
Like during the competition, come on, we're all going over here to have lunch. You want to come with?
Right.
So it was really a friendship. And I was never one of these guys that said, I don't talk to them because they're my competitors.
No.
I never once ever held back anything that anybody asked me on that car.
Mm-hmm.
There was no secrets.
Yeah.
There was none.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you another thing. It was so nice to see. I was at my car was on display at the Consumer Electronics Show, and it brought in a lot of people. It was I think it was with Milburn.
Mm.
But, my brother and I went to CES a few years ago, and I walked in, and all these guys come up to me. Earl, I now work for this company. Oh, I remember this car. This is the guy. And it was so nice to see people that were competitors that was now their job.
Yeah.
That's where their life went. Oh, I have a big shop here. I have 3 shops over here.
Mm.
This guy said, I'm now VP of sales over here. This one, I do this. And I have to tell you, it was so nice to see. It was like a full circle for everything.
Yeah.
It really was.
That's very cool.
So,
are you still into audiophile things now, or what do you listen to on now?
I know it's crazy to say, but I go to all the audio shows because I still know a lot of people at the home audio, and a lot of the displayers still know me, and I listen to them all. And it's a shame because none of them really compare to the car.
Mm-hmm.
I try, and there's many systems I listen to. I was in Munich, Germany at the Munich Hi-Fi show. That's the biggest in the world,
yeah,
and that's all high end. And I sat there. I said, "There's not a single system here that has the impact, has the focus." Because you're in a big room. You have to fill a big room with sound.
Right.
When you're in a car, it's very focused. So what I have done is, a few years ago, I found this company that made custom in-ear monitors, like headphones.
Okay.
Like the one I'm listening to right now, my earphones.
Right.
Has 18 speakers in each earpiece.
Wow.
I had to have my ears molded.
Right.
The wires are silver wired. You can get all kinds of cable. And the things, when you put these on, they fit like a glove. You can't hear anything. I'm sitting next to my phone, maybe 2 feet away from my phone, and when the phone rings, I can't hear it. So it puts you in a world that's very quiet.
Yeah.
And the ear end, it doesn't, with this thing, the speakers are about 1/8 of an inch away from my eardrum.
Right.
So I have no room interference, no nothing. They go from about 11 hertz all the way up to like 24,000.
Wow.
And I'm telling you, this is my 4th pair of them. I just love them. And, when I go to the shows, the sound quality of these are equal to anything we've heard. And just maybe 2 months ago, I heard the new Wilson system, the WAM, WAMM.
Yeah.
The speakers themselves are $875,000. They had just set them up, and they had the Brewmeister amplifiers. They look like a building. I mean, it's a million, at least $1.75 million to $1.5 million. And I'm listening to them, and it's got a lot of bass to it.
Right.
And it's in a room that's a theater room, so it had good acoustics.
Sure.
And it was adjusted for where I was sitting. There was one position you sit, and I walked away and I said, you know what? I'd take my in-ear monitors in my car any day over this. Seriously. I haven't been able to hear anything better than the car. I haven't been able to hear anything better than the headphones. And again, when you shut everything out, when I walk in the mall, imagine you're taking a stereo system that's thousands of pounds with you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine how long the extension cord had to be? I'm telling you. So when I walk in the morning, I'm listening to all kinds of high-level stuff. And on my iPhone, you'll never believe, but iPhone puts out an extremely good sound. And it's not too far off from the Estelle and Kearns when you listen with these. There's only so much sound you can get out of a CD.
Sure.
So I like going to the shows because I know people. It's like an elephant going back to his old stomping grounds. And that's really what it is. I like seeing them.
Yeah.
I like seeing the people, the atmosphere. I like seeing all the new turntables. I like seeing all this stuff. But I'm very happy. It all ended up with these headphones. They're about $1,200 for each of them, for a new pair of headphones.
Right.
And I don't even need the Estelle and Kern. I don't need a fancy system. And it's just, I'm very happy here. And as you get older, you like more quiet time.
Sure.
So that's what's happening now. I'm liking, when I go for a walk, I put my earphones and sometimes I don't even plug them in because it's so quiet when I walk. I don't even hear the cars anymore. So that's the ending to a story.
Yeah, yeah.
And the car is coming back in all of its glory and better.
That's phenomenal.
And, it's a happy story, I think. Is that the right way to say it? It's a happy story.
Absolutely.
So ask me, and what else do you need to know?
No, I think you covered most everything. I mean, you talked about Maple Shade a lot, but one thing would be like if you had one song that you could use to evaluate a system when you're going and listening to these different systems and that, what's one of your go-tos?
There isn't anymore because there's too
Yeah.
many good ones. There are too many good labels now of real audiophile music.
Right.
And there's many of them that are bringing the old analog stuff that was made on tape.
Sure.
And they're putting it on CDs. There's a company now just doing, that's all they're doing. They buy the old master tapes, they sample them at a high rates, and they sound extremely good. And even tape is getting big. So you're seeing all these master tapes coming back.
Right.
You're getting super quality CDs. So there's so many. It's not just reference. It's Chesky is to me middle of the road now.
Mm-hmm.
And even Maple Shade is very good. But there are so many great labels out there. If you go, it's called Native DSD. If you go there, these are all companies that are recording direct to DSD. No work on them or whatever. There's got to be 50 companies, and if you listen to their music, it's pure.
Right.
And there are companies now coming out with new master tapes made brand new. I mean, tape is growing faster than vinyl, and you see vinyl has taken off. College kids are getting into good sound.
Yeah.
They're not into junk sound. They want good sound. I don't know. The hobby has changed, and it goes. But the good thing is that when I'm on an airplane, I could take my big system that I used to have or my car and have it right in my airline seat.
Sure.
And not hear any kids crying or anything like this. It's pretty cool.
Backing up a little bit on the marketing side of the car, I would say that in terms of public marketing, it seems like your car got more than most. That doesn't just happen. They don't come to you. So how did that happen?
It doesn't happen. I was very enthusiastic, and I think it was all the acid I did from when I was younger that would come out every once in a while. I was one of the first guy to have a website.
Okay.
And I had Real Audio. Real Audio, that was the name of it at the time, I think it was.
Right.
And I was recording the shows and recording things of my car and putting it online.
Okay.
And my site, even at that time, it was costing me a few $100s a month just for bandwidth. Because, and everybody, it was the first of its kind. And people were coming on close to 2,000 new people per day.
Wow.
Which for me was a lot for car audio.
Right.
And I was watching, and I was getting sometimes more hits than I asked a site because I knew how to check how many hits they were getting.
Right.
And there were many days I was getting more hits. And then I said, I'm going on TV. I call up CNBC. And I said, this car, this and this. He says, okay, come on in. And I go out to Burbank studio, and they do a whole thing on there. Then all of a sudden, I meet with Jay Leno, and then we get all these magazine articles. And I was pursuing them. And then in Japan, my car was voted Ichiban car. It was on the front cover of some Japanese magazine. And all of a sudden, more people from Asia wanted to hear this car. And they would write me about it and everything like that. And then a guy from Holland calls me up and says, Earl, we see your car. I want to fly over. We're going to do a story on your car. I said, okay. And then for the hell of it, I said, I'm going to call Time Magazine. I called Time Magazine, and they said, it sounds unusual, but,
right.
They sent an editor out here. He was a really nice guy. And he says, I sent out here to do the story with a photographer. And I said, before you do the story, you're here late. It's too late to do any shooting. Come on, we'll go out to dinner. And it was funny. We went out to dinner. I took him to a place called the Organ Stop. It's where they have a real pipe organ and pizza. And he was like flabbergasted. I said, you've never heard a large Wurlitzer theater organ in person? He says, no. I said, and you work for these magazines? And he went up to the organist. You write what song? And he said, Stairway to Heaven. I said, that's Led Zeppelin. I said, Stairway to Heaven is an old song. And he played that one. He says, that doesn't sound like it. I said, no, it's totally from a different age.
Totally different.
And I remember he took the pictures out in the desert with me dressed up in a tuxedo.
Mm-hmm.
It was the craziest thing. And he took all the pictures with all the gold and everything, did a nice story, and it went United States wide. And next thing I know is Reuters shows up at my front door on a Sunday morning. And I said, what's Reuters doing here? He says, a newspaper in Detroit wants to do a story on your car. I'm here to do the pictures if you don't mind, and they're going to call you. I said, okay. And next thing I know, the people in Detroit, they sold the story to 220 other newspapers throughout the United States.
Wow.
I was like all over, and it's like everywhere, it was like everywhere. And then when people would see the car in different places, even when I was in Connecticut, they'd say, is that the car that was in the newspaper? Because of those 3-spoke wheels.
Right.
So there was a lot of publicity to this car. It was because I pushed it. And I enjoyed it. Then we got on the local channel and everything. And I look at the old video. I look like I was on speed or something. But I enjoyed doing it. And I'd always say, and there's an IASCA is the competition, and you can go to one of their shows.
Mm-hmm.
I would always mention, his shows. And I thought IASCA would get involved with it. And they just never picked it up. Like they were looking like you're showing off by being on television. I said, I'm promoting car audio. I said, and you guys are supposed to be promoting it. Well, it's not exactly what we do. We do the local contest and this and this. I enjoyed it. And for me, marketing and publicity for my regular companies that I owned,
right.
I was very familiar with it. So it came natural. And not only that, it helped my sponsors.
Right.
And it was cool. And then Alma came along, and she was on the show with me. They called her and says, well, we have 2 different shows. Says, I'm the audiophile, and Alma Gates is this. Says, who's Alma Gates? And they say they called her and had her on television. And it was funny to see a grandmother, with a car like that.
Yeah, and she was the coolest.
She was a terrific person.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about a grandmother that your grandkids fall in love with you, and your grandmother is sitting there competing with your younger friends. And she's going out to the lunches with everybody. She's sitting with all the guys. I mean,
right.
she...
Oh, and she trash talk with the best of them, too.
Yeah. Think of it from her point of view and her family and her kids.
Right.
It was a cool thing for her and a cool thing for her family.
Yeah. And she was in trucking as well.
Yeah. Well, she also owned a piece of property here in Arizona. She had a big junkyard or something. And it was like, it's in prime location. And finally she sold it. I can't even imagine what they got for it. But, that's what she did. She liked talking to everybody. She liked showing up at the shows. Am I going to sit in an old age home?
Right.
Or am I going to go out with my grandkids and go to the shows?
Yep.
That's where I'm going to go. And I guarantee you her grandkids thought she was the coolest person on earth. And I think my kids used to go to Sound-Offs with me.
Right.
They loved it. They loved when we went to a show and there was the fish man. And they're looking like, why is there a fish in his back seat? And then at the same show, there was some guy in a motorcycle outfit with an ice cream thing. It was called the Ice Cream Man from Hell. And he sold Good Humor ice cream. It was like all these things. And the kids we used to go on overnight trips. Like, take my daughter sometimes to the Sound-Offs. And she enjoyed it because other people took their kids there. So my kids had people to play with.
Right.
So it encompassed everything.
One thing I think we maybe glossed over a little bit is the ski hole access fuse panel.
We couldn't figure out where to put any of the fuses and all this stuff. And Henry says, I'm going to machine everything for you. So when you took the armrest down, he says, I'm going to machine a bar directly for your power strip to here. He machined everything custom.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put dichromatic lights in there. And if you remember my trunk, I had these special lens lights that lit everything up in a pure yellow color. And it made all the brass and all of his machine work light up. Okay. And it made the trunk, the last trunk, with the beige BMW carpet.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was something that, when I did it originally, it had the gray stretch. It wasn't anything fancy. Right. And then I said, I'm going to make it look different. And that's when I went with the tiptoes to hold the amplifiers and all the carpet, BMW carpet you could put in there. And then I'm going to light it up differently with the gold. And once I opened that trunk and people saw for the first time, there was nobody had ever done anything like that. And especially with the lighting system. Right. It was just, You have to think differently. To be like everybody, like if you're going to be a success, you don't do what everybody, you don't start a company that everybody else started. You have to be different.
Right.
And that was the advantage of doing drugs when I was younger, because everybody had to think differently. Yeah.
For somebody who is looking to do something similar as far as, building a high level car like you did or doing anything like this, what piece of advice would you give to them?
I'm glad you asked that. You can do it. There is now equipment that you can build a car very close to mine. The key to it is that coaxial mounting of the drivers. And I heard a speaker. I talked to Mike about it, maybe about putting them into the car, but he likes the BMW, and I understand. But KEF,
Yep.
has the speaker, the LS50. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
Yep.
I heard this speaker the other month. I was blown away by how nice it sounded. Beautiful detail, warm, British sound. And I guess it must have passed me by, because when I read the reviews, they're all over the place, like unbelievably good. And I went to Best Buy, I hooked it up to my phone, and I was shocked at how good it sounded. And it's a single driver. And my thought is, anybody that wanted to build a system today, even the top guys, all you got to do is buy an LS50, take the speaker out of it, build an enclosure right on top of the dashboard. You don't have to have a separate tweeter mount, no nothing. You can bi-amp it or single amp it. You can put Milberts in if you want to. And now, have you seen this KC62?
No.
Imagine a gigantic magnet with two voice coils in opposing directions. And what it has is two woofers, opposing woofers, 6.5 inches. It's the newest design. They got like half a dozen patents on it. And the crazy thing is, you could fit this in front of your seat in a car. Like when you're sitting in the car, right where your knees drop off,
right,
you could have it attached to your seat right there under both of your legs. This is crazy. Here's the specifications on it. Its response is 11 hertz to 200 hertz at 105 decibels. That's crazy.
Wow.
That's crazy.
With a 6.5-inch woofer.
Yeah. Okay. There's two 6.5-inch drivers. This magnet is big. So if somebody really wanted to make a car that's so listenable, just take two of these, put them up on the dashboard, fiberglass and enclosure, and you could have it so you could take the enclosure off when you sell the car. So you don't even have to dig the car up. Make a nice rack for yourself with a DSP, and you could use any amplifier or use tubes if you want to. And put these right next to your seat. You don't even have to drill anything for a subwoofer. It's very nice. Now, a lot of the car systems have gotten better than they were a long time ago.
Sure.
Actually, I was in the new Rolls-Royce Ghost. I was there at the premiere, and it's a very nice system, but it doesn't compare to my system.
Right.
But it's getting better. But putting a KEF system in, a competitor could have it extremely. That's what, if I was going to build a new car,
right,
that's my system. That's what I would buy with two Milberts.
Yeah.
Probably the Zapco system, with the DSP in it.
Right.
Or the Sony, because I heard John's The Magic Van, when he converted over to that Sony digital head end, the difference was groundbreaking. I just like, is that the same truck? It was unbelievable.
Oh, the GS9 head unit?
Yes. It made a spectacular difference. And I said, John, I've never heard your van sound like this. Now, here's another guy. He loves showing this to people, teaching them. He meets all the jazz people.
Right.
Audio could bring in a lot of good people. It really can. And it's
for sure.
You can see by my experience, it did nothing but good for me. There was no negatives.
That's awesome.
No negatives.
Yep. I think a lot of that was the attitude and the approach that you had too.
Yeah.
A lot of that was in your head.
I felt bad because, I remember a funny experience. This is what made me feel terrible. I was at Henry's, and I took, at the time it was my best friend, Erwin. Good-looking guy. Looked like Harry Belafonte. Very good-looking guy. I mean, like even today, he's a magnificent-looking man. And I remember we come from Henry's. I said, Erwin, could you drive? I said, I'm really tired. So he drives. And we pull into a Burger King. He's driving my car, pulls up to the window, and these two girls stick their heads out and say, "Wow, what a nice car. Wow." I'm looking like, and then it says, yes. And Erwin is playing and says, yeah, I got it a little while ago. And see, I put these speakers in and all that. Wow. Both girls gave him a sheet of paper with their phone numbers on it. We drive away from that. Even this very day, I said, I've been driving this car for 5 years, and the McDonald's girl only says, "Can I take your order, please?" I said, "You drive it once, and you get their phone number." So I felt terrible now. So it shows you, no matter how nice the car, it doesn't mean you're going to get the girl. So that was the only negative story I could tell you.
Well, that's a pretty good negative story.
Yeah, it's just a funny story. And everybody will see the new car when it's done, and
awesome.
I think they're gonna fall in love with it. And he's a guy with all these speakers. I'm telling you.
Right. Is there a target for when the car is going to be released?
I don't know. He's been going to therapy. He goes to SA, Speakers Anonymous. He's collecting all these things. So I have to see between treatment he has to work on the car. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be that long because he's been busy with work. He's got a lot of promotions. Since he moved from Buffalo to here, he's in the mortgage business. He's got a lot of promotions. He's doing very well. Life is really very good for him.
Awesome.
And this is just like the icing on the cake.
Yep.
And he's going to take it to different shows and different places. He and I have told him that this car has brought me a lot of pleasure, and it's time for someone else to get it.
Sure.
And that's why I'm backing him up on everything. I help. We discuss a lot on this car.
That's awesome.
And design, and he's very good. He's not a schleppy guy. That's just saying, okay, he bought the car, he's going to do it over. No, that's not him.
Right.
He's very anal when it comes to everything has to be perfect. He took the whole dashboard out. I'd never seen a car with a dashboard out. Everything's out. Everything. And then the metal rings.
Yep.
He didn't make a metal ring. He made a whole plate to cover the whole thing as one piece. And I looked, I said, that really is a great idea. But when we did the ring, that was revolutionary at that time.
Right.
Nobody had ever done that kind of stuff. But there were a lot of people that had these big GMC trucks or vans.
Yeah.
And what they did was they drilled the bottom floor out and they put the woofers in the floor.
Right.
When you made the hole, you could see the road, and they were free air. And there were a few people that did it that way.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, it's very surprising. And especially, like I said before, in Indonesia, I'm going to give you this guy's name for any of the people. Just go on his site and you will start seeing just all these Indonesians that really do magnificent work. His name is Utando, Utanto, and his last name is Wibowo on Facebook. Mm-hmm. When you subscribe to him, it brings you into a world of all these different competitors over there, like where we were all those years back.
Right. They're
serious. They're really good. They're good craftsmen, and their ideas are very good, but they're all up on the dashboard now. I haven't seen any of them with a single rear speaker in them either. So they're all, once I got friends with him, all of them followed the same pattern. So people that I'll probably never meet in my lifetime ended up having to get better sound and more enjoyment from one red car. So that's the story. It's different from what people may think.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you sharing it with us. Thanks for taking the time, and we'll chat soon.
You got it. Thank you very much.